Okay, with this assignment in 6.01, you were learning about Baroque art, which is pretty awesome. I was always a really big fan of Baroque art just because it's a nice contrast to Renaissance. So, although, hopefully you appreciated and learned a lot about the Renaissance art, Baroque kind of wanted to change things up a little bit. So, if we thought of the Renaissance as being very stable, I put on here Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. A lot of things in Renaissance were dealing with perspective, one point perspective. A lot of the compositions were triangle layouts, symmetrical layouts, center layouts, and all of those added to a very stable, calm, sort of feel or tone. Everything was kind of calm and it was more about the intellect, and there was not really a lot of drama happening. They wanted it to be non offensive. They wanted you to look at it and recognize the beauty of the form and the shapes that they were trying to convey. In contrast, the artworks up here at top are all Baroque. And right away, before we get into any nitpicky thing, you can tell the color palette was much more darker. It was much more dramatic and had, instead of a holistic sense of light, like natural light, um, Baroque artists really wanted a little bit of light, and almost like a high contrast where it was like just a little bit of light entering a room. And so it highlighted areas, but then left a lot of areas in deep, dark shadows. Okay. So if I had to summarize Baroque, I want you to think of Baroque as dramatic. Okay. So let's take a little closer look at the Baroque style characteristics. So they like dramatic action and movement. So if this was Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper produced during the Renaissance, this is Tintoretto's. He is a Baroque artist. This was his Last Supper, where Christ is not in the center with this very stable, symmetrical composition, but it is off to the side, and we have the table not as a frontal view, but as a diagonal. Okay. And there's a lot more motion and commotion. Um, here, this one, people are arguing, people are pointing, people are turning. This one here, arms are going up. Um, this one's bending over. So, like the folds, the actions themselves, they're like bigger, they're larger than life, a lot more sense of movement. You will have movement in um, Renaissance artworks, but it's more subtle. It's not so over the top. Okay. The other thing in Baroque is you're going to see lots of diagonal lines. And not to say that you see physical diagonal lines, but diagonal lines where our eyes go. So in this case, we go from like the top right over to the lower left. The table and the positioning of the heads create a diagonal. In this one here, Christ's arm, his body, but the way that his body's positioned, and then this figure, and then these figures here, it creates a nice diagonal. Okay. Even in here, which is much more subtle, you have the diagonal lines from the tiles, okay, that are positioned, or even the slight diagonal of the people here, like it goes down on their head, so it's a little bit of a diagonal line. So whenever you look at a Baroque artwork, you're going to see a lot of diagonal lines implied based on the positions that we see them. The other thing you're going to hear, and this is a big word, is chiaroscuro, and that's the high contrast of light and dark. So chiaroscuro gives that dramatic lighting. It's one window that's shining light on. It produces a really high contrast of light values and shadow values. I have one clear light side, and the rest is so dark that I lose some of that detail. I have my light source here, but then the rest is so much in the dark that it fades to kind of like this black area. Okay. So it's that really high contrast of just highlights and deep shadows, whereas something in the Renaissance had much more of a graceful sense of values from light to dark, and the lighting was just much softer. Okay. So chiaroscuro, high contrast, and that's a staple in Baroque. And the last one is their focus on realism of everyday stories in life. So, although they did religious subject matter, as seen here and here, they also, particularly the Northern Baroque artists, really did more like still lifes, everyday scenes. They were grounded in the sense of realism, so you're going to see that a little bit more than you would in the Renaissance. The Renaissance era was much more science-based, much more religious-based, and you didn't really see everyday sort of subject matter, particularly not still lifes, but still lifes make a comeback here in Baroque art or just day-to-days. Like this is Vermeer's. He does a lot with instruments and people playing music in their home. So that's kind of where we're seeing that everyday life. Okay, so those are just a couple key Baroque style characteristics. Feel free to go back, tweak your own writing to include a few. That's it. Have a lovely day.